Roll call, please.
Bruce Miller,
Here.
Kirk Martin,
Here.
Craig R. Curry, Patricia Griffin,
Here.
Carl Hopkins,
Here.
Karen Kahn, Jim Wilson.
Here.
All right, thank you. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. That brings us to public comment, where any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on a subject within its jurisdiction, which is not scheduled on the agenda. We have separate public comment on agenda items. The total time for public comment is 15 minutes and 2 minutes per speaker. And we have one speaker request slip, Mr. Clint Orr. Good evening.
Check, check. Got it? Yeah, good evening, Airport Commission and staff. You may have heard of me before. My name is Matthew Clint Orr. I've been working on establishing a venue for our kids, particularly the college kids and high school kids, to learn how to dance with each other. I'm the executive director of the California Country Dance Foundation, and the best place for a dance hall is the intersection of Lopez and Hollister. In particular, the Elephant Bar across the street would be ideal for a starting point. I've done a feasibility study back in May. I have spoken to the city of of Santa Barbara, of course, 18 times about it this year at public comments. And I know the 7 of them ultimately will have the decision on 521 Firestone, from my understanding. The airport authority advises the city on what is the highest and best use of the property. I think that you have overlooked the positive benefits to this location of the airport honky tonk, both from people coming from Tennessee and Texas and flying in to listen to and participate in live country music. I think we would fill hotel rooms. I think that we would have a reason to take the Amtrak to here, to the end of the line from San Diego. A chain restaurant does nothing. Nobody's going to come here, fly here, take a train here, take a bus here to have fish tacos. It's not going to happen. Or ribs. So I think you need to look beyond that and give us a chance to provide the community with a public dance hall. I've sent it all to you. I don't know if you've opened it and seen it yet. I can redo it at any time, which I will. And I'll be back on the 21st of January for your next meeting. My understanding is that 521 Firestone has not been leased at this point. Is that correct? Do we know that? I have not seen
This
anything.
is public comment.
What's that?
It's public comment,
Okay,
so we really
I'll come
don't
back and
engage in
check
discussion.
tomorrow. But yeah,
Okay.
my understanding is that it has not. So anyway, I'll be back on the 21st with a viable presentation that hopefully will open your hearts to the possibility of putting in the airport honky tonk at 521 Firestone Road. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other public comment? Okay, thank you. That brings us to notices. And on Monday, December 8th at 11 a.m., the Air Service Subcommittee did meet in the Airport Administration Conference Room. And on Thursday, December 11th at 4 p.m., the Airport Secretary duly posted this agenda at the bulletin board at Airport Administration. Item 4, the minutes. We have a recommendation to waive the reading and approve. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
as presented?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. It's approved. Thank you. Consent calendar. We have one item, the airport, the property management report, which we have received. And any changes to the consent calendar?
No.
Move for approval of consent calendar.
Second. All right. In favor of approving consent?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. There's some deliberation there, I wasn't sure. The consent calendar approved, thank you. Brings us to our liaison reports. Do we have Councilmember Hotchkiss? No, but we do have our City of Goleta liaison, Mayor Michael T. Bennett. Welcome. You have anything to share with us this evening?
I have nothing to share, but I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
All right, well, thanks for joining us.
Chair Miller, we have a Christmas present for Mayor Bennett, or past Mayor Bennett.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for serving as liaison. We really appreciate your being here so diligently and everything you bring to us. And that brings us to item 6, the administrative reports on the drought-tolerant landscape project.
Yes, Commissioner Chair, we have, as you know, with the drought, the whole city has been making conservation efforts, and here at the airport, we also have a major project underway with one of our long-term tenants, L3 Communications, MirrorPro. So tonight, I'd like for Jeff McKee, our maintenance superintendent, to give you an update on that particular project.
Good evening. We're going to talk about the drought-tolerant landscaping project at L3, as Hazel said. L3 MirrorPro is a 30-year tenant at the airport. They occupy 3 buildings and a portion of a 4th. They requested drought-tolerant landscape during lease negotiations. They formerly had a lot of turf at their buildings. The project includes 2 buildings. This project includes 2 buildings. The 3rd building doesn't have any landscaping. So the goal was to reduce the water use. We're removing over 20,000 square feet of turf and other landscape at those 2 sites and the overhead sprinklers associated with the turf. We're installing drought-tolerant plants and drip irrigation, redesigning the whole landscape at this site and redoing the irrigation there to improve the aesthetics and to reduce the maintenance requirements also. So this is an overhead shot kind of to orient you in the kind of upper left corner is the top of the tower, the round spot there in the upper left. We're looking at Burns, and the cross street that goes from the bottom left up toward the right is Cook. So these 2 buildings are at the corner of Burns and Cook. So we're looking at the building kind of in the white roofed building in the lower left-hand corner.
Would the cursor do it?
Yeah, I could probably do it. This building and this building. So we're replacing turf along the front edge here, the west edge, the east edge of this building, the south edge, and then there's another piece right here in the back that's also turf that's being replaced. So that's kind of the scope of the project. The plans look like this. This is the building that was on the left. So we're doing kind of, we took out some trees here. We replaced with a few olive trees, 7 olive trees in this case. We left a loquat tree. We're using kind of a plant palette of aloes, agaves, flax, and that kind of thing, all drought tolerant. Also, the blue chalk sticks are kind of the darker hash marks there. That's kind of the basic palette, and I'll show you some pictures of those plants as I move along. This is the building to the east. More of the chalk sticks, very similar palette there. We removed 4 trees at this site, 3 small loquats and a palm. Also putting in some new olive trees here. That's pretty much it. So this is the plant palette, kind of just a feel for what it will look like when it matures. You can see the flaxes, the Mexican sage, some of the aloes and agaves, kind of your typical drought-tolerant palette there, but a little more color than we have on some of our other buildings, so that'll be good. This is a shot of the western building as they're doing the install. They have those plants installed at this point, and they're mulching the site, so they're due to be complete on Friday, but we've been held up a little bit by rain, so I'm not sure they're going to make it, but they may make it this week. All the irrigation's completed. We're getting close. And then standing at the same point, looking back the other direction, This is the kind of mid-planting part of the project there. So this is looking directly east from Burns. So as far as other drought-tolerant efforts, we've eliminated or significantly reduced irrigation at a lot of our sites. We've actually turned off irrigation in most sites. We've tried to keep the grass kind of going in a few places, specifically Love Park and the terminal. Others we've just shut off. We have lost some plant material, but we're still in the middle of a drought. Although we've got some rain, we're still in the middle of a very serious drought. So we're continuing to save as much water as we can. We drained the fountain at the terminal. That's a city kind of policy to do that, to demonstrate that there's really not enough water to waste. So there's a sign on that fountain, advising our passengers why the fountain is empty. So we have moved as we have in the past, but we're making a top priority out of leaks and responding to reports of unplanned irrigation operation. As we transitioned from our last landscape maintenance contractor at the terminal, we had some unplanned irrigation come on over there at the terminal until our staff got a handle on that. So we've got that under control now, and we haven't had any of those for a while, so that's a good thing. Also, outreach to tenants. We've been sending emails and talking about the city's kind of, they have some kind of drought tips, and we've been forwarding those to tenants. And I think my next slide is kind of the savings, I believe. Shows that we've done a pretty good job so far. We have a 30% overall reduction in water use since between October 2014 and October 2013. So that's a pretty significant drop. Our lead terminal is also water conservation. It was designed into the building, so we have waterless urinals, dual flush toilets to use as little water as possible, drip irrigation. So the building was designed to use as little water as possible. And we've also done other retrofits, before this drought, during the last drought, installing a lot of low-flow toilets and drip irrigation, that kind of thing. So this is just since last year, though, our usage has gone down 37%. So I think that's pretty dramatic. That's all I have on the project. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I've been by the L3 site a number of times in the last couple of weeks. It's starting to look really good. I think that's great, and I know I'm sure the entire community appreciates what y'all are doing to save water. Questions?
A couple questions. Do we use some of the materials that we grind up and that sort of thing as mulch for these projects?
The mulch that we're using on this project is county mulch, so it's recycled green material from.
Great.
It's not on-site, recycled from on-site.
Close enough. And I'm sure, as the general public would like to know, is there an ultimate cost savings? Is there, for instance, the amount of water that we're saving, the money that we save for that kind of pays for the plants, and then ultimately we end up saving money? Or is it all purely based on water?
I think we didn't do the specific dollar amount. It will, over the long run, save money. It'll save money not only in water use, but also in maintenance, having to mow the turf.
And I was going to follow up with that as well,
each
yeah.
time. So it's not only a water savings, it's the labor savings for maintenance.
Very good.
And it ends up being really attractive.
It will.
It will.
It is now, and it will grow to look more attractive.
Questions, comments? Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Thanks for that report. All right. Item 7, the fiscal year 2015 airport improvement grant application. And another presentation.
Exactly. As you know, every year we submit an application to the Federal Aviation Administration for our Airport Improvement Program grant. And this evening, Andrew Vermont, our airport planner, is going to review the projects in this year's application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Airport Commissioners. The Airport Improvement Program is, as you know, a grant program that the FAA administers to spend the money that is collected over the year in the Aviation Trust Fund on capital projects at airports throughout the United States. And that's the amount that each airport gets is based on a number of factors, principally enplanements. And so each year, the Santa Barbara Airports is approximately 2.7 million. And then we have to match that with local dollars, 9.34%. And that is a very convoluted formula to come up with that number, but that's a rather modest amount given the amount of money at stake. So this year, our program is the Airfield Lighting and Safety Project, which is about a $3 million effort to basically completely overhaul the airfield lighting and electrical system, to replace airfield markings in a number of different areas that I'll point out, and also replace some of our non-standard security fence with the current standard, which is the 8-foot black vinyl with the double leaning barbed wire. So we have a number of areas that are mostly taxiway runway crossings that we'll be looking at replacing the markings either because they're worn out or because they don't meet current FAA design guidelines, or they're just confusing in a few places. And so just cleaning them up is really the principal effort there. And then the fence that we'll be working on is the eastern fence along San Pedro Creek and Firestone Road, where we have a number of different types of fence over there that we'll be replacing with the single standard. Our lighting system is currently about 16 years old, and 15 years is the minimum useful life according to the FAA, so we're pretty close to that. But we have a major problem of groundwater and seawater intrusion into the underground electrical wiring. A lot of the conduit is essentially pipe for storm drains at this point, and needs to be replaced and new wires put in so that we don't have quite so much of a power loss running through the system. And the markings, as I mentioned already, we'll be making a number of changes. The biggest one is the plate relocation of the runway 15 left threshold to the edge of pavement. It's currently at a 200-foot displaced threshold. That was done so that there wouldn't be conflict with the Jeep dealership, Chrysler dealership, and now that that has been demolished, the runway threshold can be relocated. There are also a couple places where taxiway changes names just because it crosses a runway, and that's non-standard, so we'll be looking at changing some of the taxiway names. And then, as I said, we'll be restriping in a few places. Also, here's my little picture of our wooden fence along the creek. We'll actually be replacing that, and then we also have a 6-foot fence there. We'll be replacing that in both places with the 8-foot fence, and also moving that fence back about 20 feet from the creek so that it's not, it won't be undercut as erosion occurs along the creek bank there. So we will be submitting, actually tomorrow, the AIP application as our next step, and then we'll solicit for bids when we come back at the beginning of the year. And once we've got our final bid award, we resubmit a revision to the application so that we're actually applying for a dollar amount that is based on the negotiated bid. And then in summer, we will construct all these changes. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
I did have a couple questions. You mentioned conduit replacement. Does that involve any work with the pavement? So will any of the runways actually be impacted in terms of availability during that, or is it mostly
Mr. Chair, no, I don't believe so. Most of the conduit runs parallel, as along the side of the pavement. That may be the case in a few places. We would, for runway crossings, we'll be doing boring rather than trench work, so we wouldn't be cutting into pavement.
Okay, great. And I know there's been some upgrading already to LED lighting over the last few years. Will that is that going to be remain intact or repurposed, or is it is most of the lighting itself being replaced?
I do believe we're looking at replacing.
Did you turn it off?
Some of the in-ground that are not LED, we'll be looking at making those LED. That's the kind of sore point with labor. So once we get LED in there, we'll be better off, and I think we are changing those out.
So this should also result in some energy savings as well. So,
Yes, a little bit, in addition to saving all the
but
power
replacement,
loss.
yeah, right.
Along the lines of the power loss, has there been new technology or anything to avoid the seepage of the seawater and the other water? Are we using PVC instead of metal, or is there any improvement in that?
There were some flaws with the initial design 16 years ago that we'll be rectifying. And so we will be, of course, using the best technology that we can to exclude it. We don't want to be going out there more than once.
Other questions? All right. Well, sounds like a very worthy project. Okay, thank you. And that brings us to item 8, the Goleta Slough Mouth Adaptive Management Program.
Who would have thought that the mouth of the slough would have been become such a big project for the airport? However, as you know, with the rains this month, we've had the mouth open, and Andrew has been working on a project for almost a year now to develop an application for a permit for future management of the mouth. And so he will give us a report tonight. Andrew.
Okay, thank you again. Yeah, I'll be talking about what we are now calling the Goleta Slough Adaptive Management Program, because I think we've recognized, even in the title, that we don't necessarily know what the future is going to hold, and we're going to adapt as we move along. I'll talk a little bit about background. I spoke to the Commission about this earlier this year, about our breach conditions. But we've had another one, so I'll just update you about that a little bit. And I'll talk about what I've described as the Goldilocks zone for the Goleta Slough, and then I'll tell you a little bit about our next steps. So as a reminder, this is the Goleta Slough mouth that's over at the eastern end of Goleta Beach. It is the connection between the Goleta Slough State Ecological Reserve and the airport and the Pacific Ocean. But it is also the connection for a 48 square mile watershed that covers almost the entire Goleta Valley and all the way up our range. So of course this is what the slough mouth looks like when it is open and there is a high tide. You'll see those waves are pushing water inland, and the creeks actually flow backwards for a few hours. When the mouth is closed, you have a very lovely beach that you can walk along, but it does not, and also the slough remains a vital habitat for coastal wildlife, but there are other problems associated with the mouth being closed, principally that when the water level gets too high, it presents a flood hazard, and it also can be a wildlife attractant, which is dangerous for aircraft, and it can also support a significant increase in mosquito population. And the Vector Control District is very concerned with the massive increase in mosquitoes that can occur in the Goleta Slough, especially adjacent to a university. As a reminder, back for a good 30 years or so, the Santa Barbara County Flood Control District opened the mouth within 2 weeks of its closure. They did this as a courtesy at the request of the State Department of Fish and Game, now the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, because they were concerned about low oxygen levels resulting in massive fish death in the slough. However, they discontinued that operation when they received opposition from the National Marine Fisheries Service, which is a federal agency that's charged with protecting the endangered steelhead trout. They said that you cannot demonstrate that this activity doesn't harm steelhead trout, therefore you need to do additional studies. And that is essentially the work that we are doing now, is identifying what level of impact there is to these endangered species and how we can mitigate that. So to speak very broadly, high water attracts birds, and this is a scene that we don't want to happen here. This is in Alaska. But also rapid dewatering kills fish. We don't want this to happen in Santa Barbara either. This is from a steelhead fish kill in Oregon. And I think the airport has a demonstrated track record that the tidal connectivity is ideal for the Goleta Slough. It allows a balance between the needs of fish, the needs of birds, and the needs of pilots to not hit birds. So as I said, we have a biological consultant contract with Rincon to do habitat surveys for special status species. Those are the endangered or threatened birds or fish. And to design a mouth management program that will balance the safety risk with the concerns for endangered species so that they're protected. And then after we've designed that, we do a biological analysis that would ultimately support a biological opinion from the environmental regulatory agencies. So here's where I'm talking about the Goldilocks zone. On the left there I have the elevation in feet above mean low water, basically what the lowest low tide is. And then those numbers are feet that would appear on the stream gauge in the Goleta Slough. And normally in the year you might see a 3-foot elevation at low tide when the Goleta Slough mouth is open, and 5, maybe 6 feet as a high tide when the mouth is open. Now, you will not see 6 or above with an open mouth. That just doesn't occur because with the connectivity to the ocean, water levels as they increase just flush out into the ocean. So with the mouth closed, you might see at 6 feet a significant change in bird behavior. You'll have a larger increase of duck and geese population. And then at 7 feet, we have basically the airfield storm drain system fails because the storm drain outfalls are underwater. So you won't have the capacity to drain the airfield during a storm when it's at 7 feet. So we have identified 5.5 feet as that range that we can really tolerate a prolonged slough mouth closure. If the water level is below 5.5 feet, there's no adverse effect to the airport. So we can let it be closed for as long as we like, as long as we know that there's not going to be a rapid increase in the water level. And so this range, because once you get down below 3 feet, you start seeing endangered species habitat loss. This range between 3.25 to 5.5 feet is what we call the Goldilocks zone because it's just right. So in the past 4 years, we've had in the past 3 years, we've had 4 emergency permits. The one in May of 2013 was a siphon rather than a breach. That's why it's multiple days. We found that siphon was effective but very slow and required a significant amount of labor to basically had to be reprimed every morning because it was shut down overnight by the tides. And ultimately the pipe was destroyed by the tides, so that we don't think is a viable strategy going forward. But then in February, when I last spoke to you about this issue, we had a breach. And then again, just 2 weeks ago, we had another emergency breach related to the storms of December 2nd and 3rd. So our next steps right now with our Rincon is preparing a biological assessment. This is a specific type of environmental document that will be reviewed by the environmental regulatory agencies. And if they can accept that, we can apply for permits, and then we will, once we get those permits, implement a monitoring strategy where we'll watch the slough closely, breach only when necessary, and adapt that as we redefine what necessary is, perhaps. I do want to talk a little bit about what permits are required. It's kind of an alphabet soup. We need a permit from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which involves consultation with National Marine Fisheries Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We'll also need a coastal development permit from the California Coastal Commission, a permit from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and a lease from the State Lands Commission. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Quick
Thank you.
question. So how is it monitored and measured?
There is a stream gauge in Teclatito Creek under the bridge that connects Sandspit Road with Goleta Beach. And that gauge reports to a web page every 15 minutes what the water level is.
How close to the magic 5.5 feet are we now?
I couldn't tell you because the mouth is open. It's tidally
It
influenced.
is open now.
Yes, so I would say it's in that 3 to 5 foot range. I could have checked before the meeting.
The Goldilocks zone, though, didn't, if I understood your earlier comment, in that, if it were to stay closed and be in that 3.5 to 5.5 feet, that still presents a mosquito problem?
It could present a mosquito problem. I don't know that, we don't have any evidence that the low water level creates a larger mosquito problem over what it would be if the mouth were open and we had a tidal slough. It certainly will attract and be a breeding ground for mosquitoes, and this is something that we need to pay attention to as we go through an adaptive program. But so far, the only evidence that we have is that the significant increase where we had traps that went from having a dozen to having hundreds in the mosquito traps, that occurred when the slough was over 6 feet.
So what is the disadvantage of keeping it open all the time? What is it that's going to be harmed if it were always open, which apparently it was for many years?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. The National Marine Fisheries Service is concerned with heavily involved management of estuary mouths in California, specifically related to steelhead trout. There are a number of other communities other than Goleta where the estuaries are kept open because homes might be threatened in flooding. And there's evidence to support the value of closed estuaries as a rearing ground for steelhead trout, or rearing water for steelhead trout. So what we've done is identified locations within the Goleta Slough where steelhead rearing could occur and at what water level would be necessary for that to occur. And we found basically that there's a pretty significant increase as you approach that 5.5 foot water level. And then after that, the increase continues, but at a much lower level because you're now starting to fill larger areas. So it's, you know, you don't get the depth necessary for steelhead trout habitat. And so that's sort of where our that's where we found the sweet spot, because that 5.5 feet with it closed, you can have your steelhead trout rearing without attracting migratory waterfowl. But above that, it's still great for steelhead trout, but now it becomes a problem for aviation.
Now, are the steelhead purely freshwater, or do they escape into, are they one of those that goes back and forth between fresh and salt when the slough is open?
Yes, they are freshwater and saltwater. They'll go in and out, and they do also value the connectivity when the mouth is open. Of course, all the slough mouths and creek mouths will open periodically. The trouble is, in our case, what has to flood before that happens.
Thank you.
In the times where we are having showers and that sort of thing here, what is necessary to open the mouth when we want to, and how much notice is necessary for that?
Well, we've had good opportunity to test just how quickly we can do that, and I'd say that we've responded in about 4 hours' time to go from identifying the need to getting the emergency permits, getting a backhoe and a crew out, and opening the mouth.
So it's not just you and a shovel then?
It isn't just me and a shovel.
No, actually, it's the county flood control who
And-
actually opens the slough.
So is that ever an issue? You can get the permit like on a Sunday afternoon or something? How much notice do they need?
That's a very tricky question because there is, they need a 24-hour notice. However, there's also a different section where instead of applying for an emergency permit, you do what's called a notification. And that was what you would do, outside of business hours.
And
If
they
the emergency occurred at 3 in the morning or
Yeah.
on a Sunday,
Okay.
you do a notification, and then you have to go back and mitigate for what their conditions are after the fact.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I missed this. So the timeline for completing the Rincon study is what?
We'll be completing the project description and biological assessment in March of 2015.
And then that's presented to the National Fish and Wildlife.
To about 6 agencies, yes.
Okay. So is there an estimate for the timeline that it takes to get through those agencies, or is that all pretty variable and contingent?
It is highly variable, I'd say about a year.
Okay, so this is a solution that probably wouldn't be in place before next winter if it were to happen. It's not likely to take less time than that, it sounds like.
Yes, I think it's quite likely that we should prepare for the possibility of there being another emergency permit breach before this is completed, yes.
So eventually your goal is to be able to open it based on your criteria without having to ask for a permit each time?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, certainly the airport and the flight control district feel this way, and I think that also the regulatory agencies are dissatisfied with the emergency permit as a long-term solution to the SLU. It means that we have to constantly monitor risks at the airport, minute by minute. In the case of even a 1-inch and 24-hour storm, which is not a major storm really, it can present some hazards for us because we're draining 48 square miles into airport property. And so we have to monitor that very closely, and then also reach out to the resource agencies and try to make them move as quickly as possible in order to get permission to move forward. And also the resource agencies aren't satisfied because they can't apply the conditions that they need to apply in order to ensure protection of endangered species because there's a sudden emergency present. And so we can't have monitors or netting, for example, that we could do if this was something that was planned weeks in advance.
Thank you.
And then I noticed at the bottom of the list of all the permits required, if this were to go forward, was mention of a lease. What would that involve?
State lands.
Yes, the State Lands Commission issues what are called state lands leases, and those are, that's a permit to do work within state tidelands, which the Pacific Ocean and Goleta Beach and Goleta Slough are all partially within their jurisdiction.
So it's more like an operating permit than a property type lease, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for yet another excellent presentation.
Thank you.
And good luck.
We're best friends with the county flood control.
All right. Well, I believe that brings us to the director's report.
Yes, indeed. I will just point out, we continue to have a decrease in passenger traffic. That's to be expected with American Airlines being gone. But on a happy note, I'd like to give you a sneak preview tonight of a rough cut of a portion of the flash mob that we did on December 3rd.
Okay.
This one is going to be the San Marcos Madrigal Choir, directed by Carolyn Terioka Brady, and they're going to sing Hallelujah Chorus. We also had, on December 3rd, the Santa Barbara Festival Ballet Dance, a portion of the Nutcracker, which was fabulous. And then Peter Kravachuk, who's a United Gate agent, customer service agent, burst into song with Jingle Bells. And so, but tonight I just want to show you the flash mob. This is rough, but we're getting ready to utilize these on social media. And I think you're not going to get all the sound, but I hope you can enjoy this.
Great acoustics.
They are absolutely incredible, those students. And you look at them all coming together. I mean, it was really such a fun time. We had a great time. So we'll finalize the cut here before long and get it out amongst the social media. So
Awesome.
anyway, I'm really pleased. It was fun. I'm
I
still
missed
having
it.
fun with it. The other item I'd like to point out, the annual recruitment for city advisory groups. We have 2 airport commissioners being reappointed, Bruce Miller and Kurt Martin. And Dolores Johnson was also appointed, and she'll be seated in January. So tonight we want to say good night and so long, not goodbye, to Commissioner Griffin, and we have a few items for her as well.
And while she's getting that, I would just like to say it's been a tremendous pleasure working with you. Not only have you just been awesome to work with, but it's just been invaluable, the knowledge and background you bring in real estate, and we're all really going to miss having you. I hope you'll be back soon.
Thank you. It's not going to be the same. It's going to be weird.
So we have to do this quickly.
Yes, okay.
No tears. But we wanted to give you a memento of the terminal. Oh, okay, come on. You've been around so long, I can't stand it. This time, I think you were on from 2003 until 2014.
I think that's correct.
This time, and we know that you were here years before, but I think this is a fun remembrance of
Yes.
one of the best
The
parties
unveiling of the
we've ever
terminal.
had.
It was a great party.
Isn't that great?
It is.
Yes, and we
Thank
have
you.
one other little present for you.
Oh,
That's
cool.
from,
Cool.
uh,
Nice.
terminal event.
Our gala.
Yes, our gala.
Every year, Parodies, one of the largest concession groups for airports, sends us complimentary, they say $10 or less, critter who sings. So we figured you should have this one. I will cherish him. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's going to be really strange.
It
Thank
is.
you. It's been a great pleasure working with all of you.
You will be missed.
Yes. That concludes my report.
Well, thank you again. It won't be the same without you.
All those
I
years.
guess we have exhausted the agenda,
We have.
so we will
That's very
adjourn. Happy holidays. Thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you in 2015.
Absolutely. Thank
Well,
you.
Before we
Good night.
close, thank you for these wonderful
Oh,
little
yes.
gift bags.
Thank you.
These are very nice.
Thank you.
And,
Yes.
and the flash dance and chorus at the terminal
Yes.
is beyond belief. That is
Thanks.
really wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. You're more than welcome. Thanks.
All right.
I was over there for that.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.